I started this series with a video showing how I used the hammer and dolly technique to reshape this dent. It was quite deformed into the headlight, if you recall. And if you haven't seen that video yet, I recommend you go watch part 1 in the series and then watch part 2 where I talk about the different types of body filler and some of the characteristics of each. We're obviously going to have to do some filling here, okay? And my goal when I do this type of body work, I try to get to the point where I don't have to add body filler more than 1/16 of an inch. If I'm just using the standard finish filler that you're going to see me work with later in this video. So I've really spent some time trying to get the shape in here, and we're ready to start doing some prep work, okay? There's some other issues that you have to consider if you're going about doing this on your own and you don't have a lot of experience. Obviously, if some of you old-time body guys, you can just move on. I'm trying to gear this series to the person who's just stepping out, willing to give this a try. So some of the information I give will be quite basic for those of you who are already experts, okay? But I want to talk about a couple more things before I actually start sanding and grinding and filling away on this dent here. And in this part, I want to talk about mixing, about the mixing of body filler, the types of tools that you can use to mix and spread it, because this is really critical. I see a lot of problems because people don't know how to mix this stuff properly, and they don't. I feel sorry for them because they don't know how to spread it properly, so they end up doing way more work than they have to. So I'm going to take just one of the fillers that I talked about in part 2. That's the standard, what I call the standard finish smooth filler. And I'm going to show you how I mix it and some of the tools I use to spread it. Now, obviously, there's other ways to do this. I'm not saying that my way is the only way or even my way is the best way, but this is the way I found works for me, and let me show you what I do. Since I'm already sitting down here at the fender, I want to start by talking about tools with which you use to spread the filler. This is probably, I can best illustrate this by showing the curvature in this fender and talking about these. This is a typical type of plastic spreader that you get. You can get these at many hardware stores, auto body paint supply stores, so on. They usually come in a 3-pack. They're plastic material. They're fairly flexible. There are some that are a little stiffer than others, but you have different widths. And these widths will allow you to apply filler, to different size damaged areas. Now, obviously on this fender here, you're not going to want to use this one. It's way too wide. You won't be able to get it smoothed out there with this. Now, granted, you can do this with a putty knife. You can come in here and spread this with a putty knife and sand it and sand it and sand it and smooth it out. But what I'm trying to show you is how to do it to get a really good application and minimize the amount of sanding you do, because sanding is the hardest part of body work, in my humble opinion, okay? So along with the plastic types, there are also some spring steel spreaders. Now these also come in varying widths. Now you might be able to use this narrower one by working this way, okay? But obviously, once again, this isn't going to work very well, nor this one. These are a lot stiffer than the plastic ones. These are ideal. Let's say you have a dent right in this area. This would be ideal. You could just see how I could just bend it a little bit, and I could just get a nice spread right there. Or even this one, coming up on this part of the curvature, I could come this way with the spring steel and get a real nice spread this way. So I might use these spring steel types on dents in flatter surfaces, but when you get a compound curvature like this, an area that's curving 2 directions at the same time, I generally don't use spring steel. And then there's a couple of specialty ones. There's a spreader that is very flexible. Look at this. Look at how flexible that is. It's almost like rubber. It's not a plastic. So I could get this ready for application and get the filler in here, and I could curve this right where I want that. See that? See how much curvature I get? So this may be probably either the narrow plastic one here or this very flexible. Sometimes if you can't buy these, in a narrow width. I've got 2 or 3 of these. I may actually get a cutter and cut one of these in half so I could get a real flexible spreader for this tight compound curve. And then finally there's real small spreaders like this. And these are very handy to have, particularly if you do your filling and you sand it out and you find out there's a lower area and all you need to do is fill maybe an area of a dime. Well, then you can come in with this really narrow spreader here, put a little body filler on there and just lightly squeegee that in, get it real smooth, okay? Now there's other types of spreaders. These are the most common available. I would recommend you could start out with, you know, the 3-pack of the plastic ones and probably do most types of dents. But as you get into it, you may even, I've even taken this blue one here and cut this one in thirds. So I have a very small spreader if I have to just fill a little nick or a couple little pinholes when I'm getting right down to the final finishing. So, you know, this is what you're going to need. Once again, when I do body work, my goal is to get the filler on as smooth and consistently as possible so that I minimize the amount of sanding I have to do. Now, let's go back to the bench and we'll talk about some of the things you have to be concerned about when you actually mix the body filler with the catalyst. When it comes to mixing auto body filler, you don't need a lot of specialty tools, okay? There's a number of different ways that you can mix it and different materials that you can mix it on, but I like plexiglass. I know some people use glass, but you know, you can cut yourself on that. I just collect old plexiglass and cut it up into squares like this, and I can even put this on a clipboard if I want to. But you want a very smooth surface. You don't want to mix it on paper because when you put the catalyst, the excess catalyst can soak into the paper. You want a non-porous, smooth surface. And you want something about this big. I mean, obviously, if you're just doing a little teeny dent, you only need to. But what happens is you start mixing this, and you'll watch later in this video how I kind of knead it, okay? You don't want to stir it up and put a lot of bubbles in it. So having a mixing palette, I should say, about this size works great. And then I like to use a couple different size putty knives, okay? I use a 3/4 inch to 1 inch putty knife to get in the can to stir it up. This is if I'm using quart cans, okay? If I'm using gallon cans, then of course I'll use a wider putty knife. But the putty knife lets me stir it up, also lets me pull it out in a controlled manner. Remember, you want to estimate how much you want to use for the dent, and then you need to get the same amount out of the can. And if you're using too big a putty knife, you'll be putting some on the pallet, and then you'll be putting it back in the can. I always say that bodywork is more art than it is science, and one of the real aspects of the art is estimating how much filler you're going to need. Because if you don't mix enough and you run out, that's a problem. You mix too much, it gets hard on you, and that's just a waste. So as we go through this series, you'll kind of see some of the techniques I use to kind of determine how much I'm going to need. But that really comes with practice. You can watch all kinds of videos, you can read all kinds of books, but you got to get out and do this. It's kind of like flying airplanes. You got to get out and do it and practice it to get good at it. So now we're going to talk about the catalyst. There's the catalyst right there in the little tube. Most of the catalysts will work on the 3 different fillers that we talked about in the previous part. But you want to make sure that you get the recommended catalyst for whatever filler you're using, and make sure it's not real old, okay? You can have problems with catalysts that sat around for a couple years. It's not that expensive. You can go to an auto body supply store and just buy catalyst if you still have a lot of fillers. So let's take a close look now at how I mix it, how I estimate the ratio, because this is a tough one. When you look at this and you look at the can, you say, well, I'm supposed to put equal parts of this to equal parts of that. Well, how easy is that to calculate? Well, let's open up the can and get started. If this is sat for any amount of time, even just a few days, you're going to want to stir this up. There will be separation. You can see a little bit of it there, and that's where I like this narrower putty knife. I can get down the size like this, and I can really work it. And you want to get down on the bottom too, because this will settle out, and if you don't stir it on a regular basis, particularly getting down on the bottom, you'll get down to the last quarter of the can, and the filler will be almost too thick to work. You want a nice, thick but runny consistency so you can spread it with ease. If it gets too thick, then it just gets harder to spread. All right, so I'm going to first stir this up very well, and once I have the filler stirred, now we're going to stir, if I could say, the catalyst. Now you really can't open this up and stir it, but you can knead it. What I do is I loosen up the cap a little bit. Now if you don't do this, you're going to, it's kind of like any of you squeeze mustard out on your sandwich that's been sitting in the fridge. You're laughing because you know, oh no, I got all the juice. Well, that's what's going to happen with your catalyst if you don't mix this thoroughly before you use it. Once again, this settles out in just a few days. So what I do is loosen the cap up, just let a little bit of the air come out, and then I just start kneading it. See, if you loosen the cap too much like that, it'll come out. So you want to let a little air get in there so it'll move around. Okay, then I'll close it up and really squeeze hard. Now don't skimp on this, okay? You're gonna end up having a problem. If you don't have either one of these mixed thoroughly, you could have a weak application of filler. All right, so we've got that mixed pretty well. Now let's talk about estimating the ratio between the filler and the catalyst. Now, a lot of cans, they'll say, okay, put so many inches down here and calculate this so big and then put so much of this on. There are some fillers that I've seen, they just put on the can, they say put equal parts. Well, that's kind of a pain. How are you going to estimate equal parts? So over the years, I've learned to kind of deal with golf ball sizes. Okay, that's how I estimate how much I need. I estimate, okay, how many golf balls, most of us know what a golf ball looks like. Okay, that's close to a golf ball. And if you're looking at a dent like that, and you say, well, you're not going to need 5 golf balls. 1, 2, maybe. It probably depends on how much you're going to be removing, but once again, that comes with practice. So what I'm going to show you now is how I mix it. I'm just going to take 1 golf ball, okay? And this is where this, okay. Now once it hits the pallet here, okay. Now some of you are going to say, Kent, that's not exactly a golf ball. Well, okay. Sometimes you don't have to be that accurate, all right? Now if you're going to not be using this any longer, this is real important. Take and put the lid on it. Even if you don't thoroughly seal it, just put the lid on it if you're not going to be using it again right away, because the more this stays exposed to air, the more it dries out and the thicker it becomes over time. Okay, now I have my golf ball here of filler, and I'm going to add 2 to 3 inch ribbon per golf ball. That's 2 inches to 3 inches. And you're probably asking, well, Kent, what makes a difference? It has to do with temperature. If it's real cold out, I may put 2.5 to 3 inches of ribbon. If it's your normal temperature, you should be putting 50 degrees is the lowest you should be applying body filler. I like 60 to 70. If you're working on a hot summer day and it's 100 degrees out, you probably don't want 3 inches. It's going to dry too fast on you. But I'm right now at about 65, 68 degrees, so I'm going to put just a little bit more than a 2-inch ribbon for this particular golf ball size. Now this, you have to estimate your 2 inches, see? Now that's runny, so I got a little bit more than I want. See that? I go, oh no, I got more. So what you want to do is if you end up putting a little bit more ribbon on there than you really intended to, just get this out of the way. Okay? If you put it over here, you might be able to use it in the next application. Don't just mix it in, because what that will do is will make the filler dry too fast and you won't have enough working time. And of course, the faster this dries, the more it shrinks, so it's more prone to crack. It'll get hot. If you put too much catalyst in the filler, this will actually get hot or warm while you're mixing it. Okay, now for the mixing. Don't just stir it up, okay? You don't want to stir it up and beat it real fast, because you could add air bubbles to the filler and that will show up when you go to sand it. So what I do is I kind of knead it like this, see that? Now you're going to see why it's so important to have a smooth surface and a clean, sharp-edged putty knife, because you want to be able to get right underneath it and roll it over and move it back, say, and spread it down like this. The fact that the catalyst is a different color than the filler aids in mixing. Now you can see, look at that, I've got a lot of striping here going on, and some light spots. If you don't thoroughly mix it, those light spots will not harden, and when you go to sand the filler, you're going to have to end up grinding it out, because it will never harden. Okay, so I'm going to keep squeezing this out, down like this. Now you've noticed here that I'm starting to get a little bit of consistency in the color. Now if I were doing this on my own, I would be working a lot faster. You don't want to spend more than a minute to a minute and a half mixing this, because you may only have 5 to 8 minutes to work it before it starts to harden up on you. Okay, now this is another reason I like the plexiglass. I can come right out to the edge here, scrape that extra off, move that back in. Look at there, a little bit of redness from the catalyst. Okay, I'm working it. Okay, now it's ready to apply. What I'll do is I'll choose the spreader I want. Let's say I'm going to use this spreader. I'll take the spreader and come in and remove the excess from the putty knife, set the putty knife aside, and then I will use my spreader to do the final mix like that. See that? You get a little bit more red streaks there. Okay, now we have a consistent filler and we're ready to apply it to the metal. Okay, I'm back. It's been just about 12 minutes since I applied or finished the mix on this little sample of body filler here. Now, the reason I didn't come back right away is I had to go clean my tools, okay? I had to clean all these tools. If you don't clean these tools, folks, you let that body filler dry on them, whether it's the putty knife, the spreader, or your plexiglass, you have a huge, job ahead. So always give yourself enough time to get the spread on the car and then immediately clean your tools, okay? I had to use lacquer thinner on these because it was even getting a little late. Now, this started to harden at exactly 10 minutes. Look at how flexible it is. See, it's still quite flexible. It's actually kind of soft. See that? I can dig away at it. See how I can dig away at it? And if I touch it right now, it's warm. It's warm to the touch, showing that the catalyst has done its job. It's a very consistent color. Now, if I let this, I may leave this here and we'll let it sit, overnight. And when I do the next part, I'll show you how hard this gets. You've already seen that in the previous video. But this is when you want to start working it. You don't want to wait until it gets totally hard before you do any work on it all. And we'll get into that in one of these later videos. So I'm satisfied with the mix on that. A couple final comments is if you find, this is why I like it about 10 minutes, after mixing. I mix very quickly and then I immediately apply it. So I'm done at about the 5-6 minute mark in my application. And then I have time to clean the tools. Or if I have an assistant helping me, which really works, is I can have him or her clean the tools while I get ready to start the initial sanding on the body filler. But you have to move very quickly. If your filler is drying or starting to tack off and get rubbery like this with 5 minutes or less, you're adding too much catalyst. Back off the catalyst. If it's taking 15 to 20 minutes to tack up and start to get rubbery like this, you're not using enough catalyst. And when that happens, you're going to have an issue of the sandpaper plugging up. And you're going to have to keep changing your sandpaper because it's taking too long for the body filler to harden. Okay, so that's an overview of mixing and the tools you'll need for spreading. In the next part, before we actually get into applying this to the fender there on that Mercedes E430, I want to talk about safety. I know you, oh, I don't want to hear about safety. I want to see you fix a dent, Ken. Okay, but using this stuff can be hazardous to your health. It really can. So I would be remiss if I did not talk about safety when you're working on fixing your own dents.